Hello and welcome to the Wakbada Bassett Creek Oral History Podcast, where our guests discuss ways that they and other indigenous peoples have lived, worked, and played in the Wakbada watershed for thousands of years. This project was created in Minnesota Makoche, or Minnesota, the traditional and contemporary homelands of the Dakota people. The project was co-led by Dr. Casey Keeler and Crystal Boyd, with support from community partners. More information is included at the end of this episode. On behalf of everyone who contributed to this project, thank you for tuning in. Please be aware that this interview includes content about sexual abuse.
Good afternoon. I am here today with Ben Blackhawk for the Wakbada Bassett Creek Oral History Project. Thank you for joining me today, Ben.
Good to be here. My Indian name, Wojina Jinga, means standing thunder. So that would be Wojina Jinga. And it means to strike and to stand. Naji means to stand in the Winnebago language. So my dad called me Standing Thunder. I'm a member of the Thunder Clan of the Winnebago tribe of Nebraska.
Thank you so much for that introduction. The student that I'm working with on transcriptions, she's non-native herself, but she is getting her PhD here at Wisconsin, and she is a linguist who studies the Ho-Chunk language.
Excellent.
So she works very closely with the Ho-Chunk tribe of Wisconsin. So she'll be like, let's make sure this is correct. So when you get the transcriptions, you'll be able to approve that as well and catch any spelling errors as well.
The orthography differs a little bit between Nebraska and Wisconsin, but
yeah,
I'm
sure
okay with Wisconsin orthography.
I've been learning lots about the orthography, particularly for folks who are Dakota. And I was like, is it worth it to pay a Dakota language speaker? And then I was like, no, because there's so many different preferences based on generation or tribal affiliation.
Yes.
So I'm just kind of letting folks, if they want to offer translations for any indigenous words or names, kind of letting them do it themselves, but it isn't expected. Yeah. So to begin, when and for how long have you lived or worked in this area surrounding Bassett Creek?
So my family moved here in 1970. My dad, Barry Blackhawk, was a teacher. After he graduated from Mankato State University, he taught for a couple of years in Renville, Minnesota, but then got a job in the Minneapolis Public Schools. And so we moved here to Crystal, and like I said, in 1970. And I, for the time I went to college, I lived in Northfield. I went to St. Olaf College, but then kind of moved back to this area once I was graduated and started working as a teacher myself in the Minneapolis Public Schools, and then later at a couple of different private schools. So I raised my own kids in this area as well.
So what brought your family to this area in the 1970s? And then why did you return later as an adult?
So my dad, working at Minneapolis Public Schools, was looking for a house. I think we lived in White Bear Lake for 6 months. And part of the reason for that was my mom, who is non-native, she's German and Norwegian. Her sister lived in White Bear Lake, and so we had relatives there, and they were able to help us find a place. But after a while, I'm not really sure why, because I was only 8 years old at the time. We moved to Crystal and lived in a house right off Broadway in the northern part of Crystal, kind of where Broadway meets Bass Lake Road. Yeah, so it was work that brought us here at first. My dad working as a teacher. He taught English and Phi Ed, and was the advisor for Indian Upward Bound, and I think it was called something different then too. There was other names for the Indians at South High. So in Minneapolis. So he did a lot to grow that group and bring them along. So that's what brought us here. And then after college, I married a gal that I met in high school here. I met at Cooper High School in New Hope, and so we moved. My mom was still living here, and her parents lived in New Hope, just 5 blocks from here, and we're still in the same house that we've been in since 1988. We're thinking about moving, but we're still here for now.
And you're in Crystal now? Still.
Yep,
okay.
That's correct. Yep, like just 5 blocks from where I grew up.
Wow. My husband and I, when we lived in Crystal, we lived basically 1 block in from Robbinsdale, right by that Welcome Park.
Oh yeah.
So we were off of County Road 81 and kind of 42nd, right off of Broadway.
Sure.
So I feel like living in this area in the 1970s and your dad working in Minneapolis at South High School, you were probably witness to a lot of American Indian activism as well.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, we had cousins and other relatives who were much more involved, you know. They were at Wounded Knee, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty sure my mom was pretty glad we weren't there to witness that. the you know, occupation and so on, and the standoff. And so yeah, my dad was definitely a part of American Indian movement, and you know, was friends with all the leaders and so on. And I'm not sure, but I think they sometimes had meetings at our house, and you know, I don't think we were allowed to be in the room, but I don't know that for sure that happened. Maybe they just were gatherings of friends he had over, but yeah, until my family kind of split up though when I was 10 years old in 1972, and but we still saw my dad a lot because he still lived in the area. He would kind of move back and forth between the reservation in Winnebago, Nebraska, and different homes he had here in the Minneapolis area, because still taught in Minneapolis public schools for several more years, and worked in education pretty much all his life. So
okay, wow. So you said you went to Cooper High School.
That's right.
When you were a student, was there any Indian education programming that you were aware of?
Not that I was aware of. I was more interested in music and theater. And so because my mom worked for Indian education in Minneapolis public schools.
Okay.
For many years, she was a secretary and an administrative assistant in that office run by Rosemary Christensen. And but they also had a friend from where they grew up. My mom and dad met in Albert Lea, Minnesota.
Okay.
Where my dad went to high school in Albert Lea, and they got married there. And a couple of us, my older brother Brad and I, were both born there. And so they knew a guy named Wally Kennedy from Albert Lea. And he later started the urban arts program. And so I was able to, because my mom knew Wally, I was able to get in the urban arts program, and I was able to go to the children's theater school.
Okay.
When I was in 8th and 9th and 10th grade, I would leave school every day at 12:30 and go down and have classes in the afternoon at the Children's Theater of Minneapolis.
Wow, that's a good opportunity.
Yeah, it was. It was. I learned a lot there. They they were pretty unique in using young people for the in the creative part of the process of creating theater.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a very, very good opportunity for me. Unfortunately, there was other things going on too there. You may have heard of the sexual abuse and so on with the director John Donahue. Was later, was later arrested and so on. And so I was a part of a lawsuit just recently that recently concluded with Jeff Anderson, and I was a part of one of 17 people that sued Children's Theater and received a judgment because of the sexual abuse that happened to us while we were there. So
I'm sorry to hear that.
That's it's been something that I've kind of been in denial about for years and years, because I wanted to say, as a man, especially these kind of things that you want to say it doesn't affect you, but it does affect you in all kinds of hidden ways, and so I feel like, with therapy and everything, I'm finally coming to some healing and some understanding about that. So that was part of my background there, and I gotta say that being Native was I think a part of my being there. I think they let me in part because I could sing and act and dance and all that stuff too, but I think being Native, you're in this pretty much white world that I grew up in here in Crystal. Right. You're seen as kind of a curiosity. Right. You're seen as something exotic, and you talk about microaggressions that you noticed in the Anoka Hennepin School District, and before we started recording, you mentioned that, but we didn't call them that in our day, but it was, we learned to ignore or to make fun of those kinds of things that people would say that you were Native, just really, to them, innocent things like the old term Indian giver, or, I remember one time when I was a kid and we lived in Renville, we was at a birthday party and they were bringing us home in the car, and we were rambunctious 6-year-olds in the back seat, and the mom was like, settle down back there, you acting like a bunch of wild Indians. And I kind of looked at her with my innocent little 6-year-old face and said, I'm an Indian. And oh boy, did she feel bad about it.
I can imagine too, growing up in southern Minnesota, it's also just a complicated landscape because of the history.
Yeah. So, that's the kind of, it was something, it was never anything like I felt I was being excluded or, sometimes I felt looked down upon or made fun of, but and I guess I could give just as well as I got. So I always figured it came out in the wash. So
you went to Cooper for the most part, and then your children, did they go to Cooper as well?
By then I had started teaching for some private schools, and so I took them to school with me.
Okay.
In the 90s, I worked at St. Paul Academy. And so my first 3 kids had part of their education, at least their elementary school education, in St. Paul. And they would ride with me every day. In 2001, I was part of starting a brand new Catholic school in Plymouth here in the western suburbs, Providence Academy.
Okay.
And so my oldest child, Rachel, finished at St. Paul Academy in 2004, but the rest of my kids finished at Providence Academy. at least that the next 4 kids finished there. And so I was there until 2017. And so no, they didn't go to public school, except my youngest Benjamin. He went there for 3 or 4 weeks before he just kind of dropped out. He had a diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome, or he's diagnosed on this autism spectrum, and so he was kind of unschooled. He couldn't really sleep at night when everybody else slept. He still to this day at age 20, he keeps he's very much has a different sleep cycle than everybody else. So we had to take him out, and he did, but we tried sending him to Cooper for 4 weeks or so. That's the only one of my kids, of my 6 kids, that went to Cooper.
So the kids all went to private schools that were religious based?
No, St. Paul Academy was not religious based.
Okay.
It was named after the city rather than the saint. It's a 100-year-old private school, and it's very much for the brainy kids.
Okay.
It's considered to be academically very challenging, and I guess F. Scott Fitzgerald went to St. Paul Academy. It's that old. It's it's more than 100 years old. But it was like a day school, in the early part of the 20th centuries. And it was kind of out in the country in those days for St. Paul, but now it's right there in the urban city. It's right next to St. Kate's College there on Randolph Avenue.
Oh, I don't even think I knew it was there. My husband and I, before living in Crystal, we lived in Highland Park. We rented an apartment.
Yes,
so
indeed.
I feel like I went past St. Kate's every day, but I don't think I knew St. Paul Academy was tucked in over there as well.
That's right. It was right on the other side of the hardware store that was on the corner there.
Okay.
And it's down towards Snelling a little bit more, right by Carboni's.
Oh yeah, man, I miss that neighborhood. That good pizza.
Yeah, my wife went to St. Kate's, so she lived in that neighborhood for a while too.
Okay. So in their education experiences, did they ever have any Native education programming?
No. They at St. Paul Academy, they weren't. Yeah, no. The answer is no. They didn't have any either at St. Paul Academy or Providence Academy. As a matter of fact, because I'm slightly less than half Winnebago, they are not tribal members.
Okay.
You need to be 25% or greater to be automatic tribal members. And it's, unfortunately, they were born in the time when all kinds of people are trying to become tribal members to get casino benefits. And, I was never interested in that. But I didn't want to also be perceived as, trying to get them in for that reason.
Right.
So I never really tried that hard to petition to have them become tribal members. So
right. And they know who they are.
They do. Mm-hmm. They have Indian names, and they know who they are. Like you said, perfect choice of words.
Yeah, gotta love those colonial legacies of things like blood quantum.
Blood quantum. Yeah. You love it and you hate it.
Yeah. So growing up and now living in Crystal, did you know, or do you know now, any other Native families in your area?
So we had a famous Ojibwe artist that lived in our neighborhood. I forget his name right now, but if I showed you his paintings, you'd know. He has a famous painting of the hoop dancer, and why can't I remember his name? It's gone out. Maybe Brad will remember, but other than that, I don't remember a lot of Native families in our neighborhood or growing up near around us. And anybody that we met that was Native, they usually weren't Winnebago. They were Ojibwe, or they were Lakota or Dakota. Yep. So most of the natives that we knew were either relatives or friends of our family, but most of them didn't live in our area.
So most of your family kind of lived outside of the Crystal area. Did they live in the Twin Cities at all, or even out of the state?
My native relatives, most of them lived in Winnebago, and later on, once as an adult, some of them, my cousin Heather had a kid that lived with my brother for a while, Brad, and other than that, we had some relatives that sometimes lived in the Minneapolis area. It seems like they would frequently go back and forth between the Twin Cities and the reservation down in Nebraska. You get a job for a while and you make some money, and then you miss home, and so you quit and you go back and live off the money you made, and then after a while, you run out of money. There's not that many opportunities in Winnebago, and so back on the road.
Yeah.
Come find a apartment in Minneapolis or whatever. So that was kind of the story.
Lots of movement back and forth.
Yes, indeed.
So you also mentioned when your family came to Crystal in 1970, your parents were able to purchase a home. And you and your wife now are homeowners. So how has that, do you think that was kind of like a motivating factor for coming to this area, was the ability to access homeownership?
Oh, yes. Oh, definitely. I think that has provided a lot of stability, and that's something my mom pretty much insisted on, if we could afford it, because they had lived a lot of different places, and this is our first chance to, have home ownership. And with my dad's kind of really good, stable job, is a good union job there at Minneapolis Public Schools. Ironically, I think the first year there was the year of the big strike, though. So there's a picture of my dad in a cowboy hat in the old union newspaper, holding the picket sign, and they loved that picture. But then when it came time for me to buy a house, I was also a teacher in Minneapolis Public Schools. I taught at Anderson Open School, and I believe it was 1986 was my first year, and I taught there for 6 years. And we bought this house in 1988. And the way we got it was there was a program for first-time Indian home buyers that I found out about. And so there was loans that were designated for Minneapolis, for St. Paul, for the suburban areas, and then for Duluth. And so I put my name in, and they had a lottery, and we were like last in the lottery. So
but I just thought, got it.
we tried, we didn't get it. Because we were chosen last, but it was coming to a close. It was the end of 1988, and they called us in late October and said, there's loans in Duluth that nobody wanted. So there's extra loans that we'd like to offer you one for wherever you want to live. And so we quickly found this house. I think it just took us a week or two to find this house, and boy, did they string us along all through November. We were getting ready to move. The closing was scheduled for December, but they wouldn't let us know, and they were checking and rechecking, and boy, they seemed really reluctant to take a chance on me, So it's kind of a nail biter, but in the end, they, about 6 days before closing, they finally told us, okay, well, you got the loan. And it was, in those days, it was a 6% loan. That was like unheard of. It was so low, and it was contract for deed and this kind of thing. And boy, the homeowners were really biting their nails too. They wanted to sell, and they had already moved to Alexandria, I think, and they were retired. So yeah, the ability to own a home here and to raise our kids here. There's lots of good parks around. It's a quiet neighborhood with lots of trees, very tall trees that, they planted this neighborhood in the 1950s. Our house was built in the 1950s. It's a rambler, and we have a 90-foot cottonwood tree that I'm looking at out the window over here, and it has a lot of stories to tell. I'm sure it was here when they built the house. So, but a lot of maple trees, and most of the elms got cut down in the 1970s, unfortunately.
Oh, yeah.
Dutch elm disease, but yeah, it's been a good place. So
the first time homebuyers program that you mentioned, was that a HUD program?
I think it was, yes. Yeah, that sounds right.
Okay. I feel like I need to go back and check in with my parents, because when we moved to Coon Rapids, we had previously been renters, but my parents were able to buy a house. So I should double check and see what program that was, because I know it was like an Indian housing program, but I guess I never probed to figure out more specifically what was it.
The year was 1988.
Yeah, and I think that was right around when we bought our house. My parents bought our house in Coon Rapids too.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah, I started kindergarten in Coon Rapids around then. Yeah.
Wow.
At the public schools though.
Sure. Oh no, yeah, I get it.
So living in Crystal, you're in the Bassett Creek watershed area. Have you ever thought about the Dakota history of this geography?
As a matter of fact, I've thought a lot about it. My friend Jim Rock, who was a science teacher in the Wayzata district, we met at a science math conference in the 90s, and we started working together, teaching Indian students at the University of Minnesota during the summertime. We had a Indian math and science camp, and as part of our camp, I actually started working at the camp a couple of years before before I found Jim, and he injected a lot more Dakota knowledge and place knowledge that I didn't have as a Ho-Chunk. He showed me this book by Paul Durand, Where the Waters Gather and the Rivers Meet, and that famous map that has all the native place names. I think I found a little copy of it there. You can see Hahawapadan on there. And so he showed me that, and we developed a sacred sites tour, and we had native kids from all over the country take this Indian math and science camp at the University of Minnesota. It was run under the auspices of ASIS, American Indian Science and Engineering Society. But we wanted to show kids the sacred sites of this area, so we would take them to see the Red Rock down in Newport, Minnesota, and we would go to Wakantipi, which is now the Vento Park, right? And it was really nothing to see then, but we could tell the kids, this used to be a huge cave, and then it was blown up, and they had cave paintings, and we tell the stories, and then we end up at and we do a few other areas. We'd take them downtown Minneapolis and St. Anthony Falls, and we'd ask them to imagine what it was like, before, when the falls were in a different place, and what happened and why does it look like this today, and then we'd bring them to we end up at Minnehaha Creek at the end, and just had a nice picnic there. And so it was always a good day, and we always laid tobacco with the kids at each of the sacred sites, and asked them to remember their relatives and remember our relatives. Oh, I almost forgot Mounds Park, where Jim grew up, the Indian Mounds Park in St. Paul, that overlooks Wakantipi. And we'd sing, and we would, even though it was a public school, we'd pray with the kids, like that. So we natives can get away with that kind of stuff, and other people can't.
Rightly so. So was this program, did the students, did they stay at the St. Paul campus of the University of Minnesota for a few days?
That's where it started. It started on the St. Paul campus, and they stayed in Bailey. After a while, it moved over to the Minneapolis campus. And yeah, the last years of the program were in Minneapolis then. So they stayed there too.
I feel like my sister maybe did this.
Oh, really?
Because I remember her going to like a summer program at the University of Minnesota when she was still in high school.
Yep.
She stayed on the St. Paul campus for a few days, and I think it was like an ACES program. But by the time I would have been old enough, I don't think it was still going on.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I feel like I'm the smarter one of the two as well.
Yeah, it was a lot of, we did a lot of sort of pre-college grooming for, getting kids thinking about, living in the dorms, and, you guys are going to college, right? And so the math and the science, you really have to pay attention. And so we gave them some native connections to math and science. Jim would talk about thinking Incan and applying Mayan, and there was a lot of mathematical patterns that we found in quipu, this knotted strings from the Incan culture, to show them we had, with computers you work with strings of bits, but the Incans had bits of string. They kept, it was also a binary system of keeping information. It was a not or no not, ones or zeros. And so it would show that the same ideas, science is something that's not white, it's not just European. It's a science and math. There's a worldwide phenomenon, and everybody contributes equally. And so that's the way we tried to get them to look at math and science. So
yeah, I think that's so important. Even being, here at the University of Wisconsin, I think about Native students who are in the STEM fields, and just how few Native mentors or professors that they have access to, and what a difference that would make for a lot of students to have that kind of Indigenous knowledge being much more prevalent for everybody, not just Native students, but all students in those fields. Yeah. So kind of on the flip side of that question, have you ever thought about your identity as a Native person living in a predominantly white suburb?
Well, yeah, I think about it all the time. I'm kind of two minds about identity. We talk about identity a lot these days, and there's even identity politics that go on, and and so I'm a strong Catholic I had a pretty profound conversion experience after I left the children's theater. I was looking for meaning in my life because of the abuse that I had suffered there, and so I had a very profound encounter. I'll put it that way, with Christianity, with the person of Jesus, and then it was, and since I didn't have I didn't grow up on the res or in the I guess in close proximity to my native culture, yet there was kind of the quality of a vision quest at that tender age of 16, where I spent hours in my room just reading the Bible and trying to come in contact with the Mauna, with the Creator, in that way, because my dad had left, and I was trying to make my own way in the world like that. So I the friends around me at Cooper would help me out, and they befriended me, and so I fell in with the evangelicals, and then I met this girl, and she was Catholic, and so I started trying to find out about the Catholic religion too, and so ended up marrying her and joining the Catholic Church, and I've been, through all the scandals and everything that have happened to the church in the last 20 years, I've kind of kept to that original vision of it's about the person of Jesus, and it's about the charity and the love that he brought to the world, and that he basically made a lot of the wonders we have in the Western world possible. I know there's a lot of baggage along with that too, that a lot of bad treatment of Native people, on behalf of people who thought they were doing good things,
Mm-hmm.
and my dad was always about reconciliation. He knew when it was time to be angry and when it was time to spout off, about injustices. But he also always told me that I had an answer in my genes from both sides of the world, and that we can't just continue to foment injustice. It doesn't make injustice better to pile more injustice on top of it, or to
Mm-hmm.
pile more crimes or hate, or any of those things. And so I know it's probably not a real popular thing to talk about nowadays, about reconciliation and about let's get along and work together, and that this is not the season for that message, it seems. And so I feel kind of like a relic in a way. My dad taught me this way of reconciliation, and that Christianity and the Native way of seeing things are not incompatible. Mm-hmm. There's many intersections and places where you can cooperate and make progress and learn together and bring peace and good living. So that's what I think about that, being Indian in a predominantly white society.
Mm-hmm. So you weren't growing up when you were younger, you weren't raised Catholic?
No. We were Lutheran. My mom was German Norwegian from Albert Lee, like I said, and mm-hmm. So we always went to the Lutheran church. Well, when my parents split up in 1972, she felt she felt a little stared at, a little judged, and somebody probably said something that wasn't too charitable to her. And so we stopped going to church at that point. And, but there was, like I said, I fell in with the evangelicals in high school, and they kind of took me in. So they just loved me for who I was, and they didn't really care if I was white or Indian or whatever. They just wanted to share the love of Jesus with me. So
I feel like for you, thinking about being Native in a predominantly white environment, you've also had to then think through the role of religion and identity as well.
Very much so.
And probably something that you continue to think about, like being Native, being Catholic, being so heavily involved, and teaching at a faith-based school as well. Yeah.
I very much think about it. And the other aspect of that is my brothers are very much involved in the Native American church. They have become kind of leaders, and they sometimes invite me to participate. And I don't consider myself to have that as my primary religious commitment. But like I said, my dad always told us there's an answer in my genes from both sides of the world. So on the other hand, in the Catholic Church, I've gravitated to the most traditional kind of expression of that faith, which is the Latin Mass. I've become, because of my work in music, I went to St. Olaf, was a music major as well as a math teacher, and I've become an expert in Gregorian chant, and teach and lead several groups in the Twin Cities, singing Latin Gregorian chant at both traditional Mass and the newer Mass as well. So it's kind of like, if you're Native, you seek out the most traditional. You look at the ancestors, and you're taught to value what they say and to emulate them. And it's kind of in our DNA. That's how we were able to survive, because we listened to our elders and honored them by doing what they do and saying what they say.
I think it's so interesting too, in thinking about the role of boarding schools and Christianity in American Indian communities and assimilation, and how there's today so many Native people who might be devout Catholic, for example, but still so culturally involved and aware in ceremonial practices too. I think just religion, broadly speaking, is so important for Native people, regardless of what that affiliation is. Yeah. I think my mother-in-law also likes going to Latin Mass.
Oh, really?
My husband, so my mother-in-law and my husband, they're Lebanese. So she sometimes goes to like the Lebanese churches in South St. Paul as well. Wow. So I think some of those services are done in Arabic even.
Yes, the Maronite. Right?
Yeah,
is right down there by All Saints, where that's my full-time Sunday gig is the All Saints, the FSSP's Fraternity of St. Peter. It's just 2 blocks from the Maronite church.
Okay.
We got that beautiful Ukrainian church right in between the two as well.
So on Sundays, you go to Mass, not necessarily at Epiphany.
Right.
Okay.
I don't. No, I go down to All Saints. They do exclusively the Latin Mass at that parish now since 2013.
Okay. I'll have to ask if she goes there or any family members, because though my husband and mother-in-law are from Coon Rapids, all the rest of the family is in kind of the South St. Paul area.
Oh, South St. Paul. Yes, South St. Paul, that's the other Latin Mass center. They have St. Augustine's and I think it's Holy Trinity. probably where we've had this pastor here at St. Raphael's, Father Altier, and he got moved to South St. Paul, so that he's doing the Latin Mass there.
I never thought I'd be so learning so much about churches through this project. But you know, the Valley Community Presbyterian Church is obviously Presbyterian, so I've been learning about the presbytery. One of the other participants in this oral history project is a gentleman named Grant Tubles, and his dad is the Reverend Robert Tubles, who's at one of the Indian mission churches in Minneapolis.
Okay.
So he was kind of explaining to me about the Episcopalian church. He went to Breck in Golden Valley, which is an Episcopal church. I'm like learning all this religious history through this project as a person that does not identify as Christian. But it is interesting to see Native people going to these different religious denominations, regardless of what it is. One of the other folks I interviewed for this project is a woman named Diane Wilson. She's Dakota, and she's an author, a pretty well-known author in the Twin Cities. And her family actually attended Valley Community Presbyterian Church. Up until the time, I believe they were confirmed. And then her parents are kind of like, you know, you're old enough to make your own decisions about if you want to attend the church or not. And her siblings opted not to. Yeah. So, and thinking about, again, kind of growing up in this region, in the Bassett Creek region, growing up, were you involved in any cultural activities? Is that something you went to Minneapolis for, where there's the larger urban Indian community? Or did you travel back to your home reservation for cultural activities, either growing up, again, in this area, or as an adult raising your own children?
So as a child, when my dad was with our family, we would make regular trips to not just the Winnebago powwow, which happens in late July, but you know, a few summers we traveled around and kind of did the powwow circuit. And you know, I think my oldest brother was involved in a few dance contests and so on and so forth. I remember going to North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, Wisconsin, as well as Shakopee had a big powwow when I was growing up. And so yeah, we all had regalia that we would curate and take care of, and we each had our own little suitcase. And but then after he left, that became something that was harder to make happen, you know. My mom, as a single mom, you know, she understood the importance of our culture and language and everything, but as a single mom, she could only do so much, you know. And my dad would, you know, show up once in a while and take us places, and we'd see him at powwows, and if we, you know, had the wherewithal to get there and make it happen. Then after college and after marriage, and we were raising our own kids, by then my dad had kind of accepted the fact that he was an elder. It took him a while. It took him a long time. Somebody growing up in the 60s, and you know, he held on to his youth for a long time, you know. Past its sell-by date, I think, but eventually
I have a good mental image of your dad.
So yeah, and so, but eventually, you know, he would make sure to get us in the Native American church and make sure our kids had Indian names, and that so we're always a part of that, and we try to make it to powwow at least every other year. And so my kids are familiar, all but my youngest. My youngest doesn't have an Indian name, and he was only 3 when my dad died, so we didn't get a chance to get Benjamin an Indian name. He's my youngest son. I feel like he should just take my name since he has my English name too. But anyways, but because they're not tribal members, you know, some of they don't feel, I don't think, the same connection to the place, to the people, to the culture that I did growing up. And you know, I somewhat regret that. But some of them have shown some interest. My son Joseph at the who's in his 3rd year at the University of Minnesota, is going to finish next year, I think. He took Dakota because he was interested in the culture and that it was being offered, and he needed a language credit. So I think he took it for a couple of years, and they told him he could have switched to Ho-Chunk, but because it was online anyways, but ultimately he missed the deadline, and so he stuck with Dakota. So he so there's some interest there. And
great place. It's a great place to learn Dakota at the University of Minnesota.
Yes.
Great instructors. But I was going to mention, we teach Ho-Chunk here at the University of Wisconsin too. Yes. And I think it's online.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think he was offered that opportunity, and
I know
with deadlines.
Yeah, I know when we teach, so the University of Wisconsin also offers Dakota, but it's through the University of Minnesota.
Yes.
So there's like some really great like language consortium, which is really nice when you think about how few native language speakers there are, and that these really aren't high enrolling classes. So it makes sense to kind of share our resources. Yeah.
Great. I love it.
Yeah. I'm going to mention this now because I was thinking about it before when you were talking about the Catholic Church, but I forgot to mention it previously. A good friend and colleague that I have, she's Dakota and grew up in kind of Minnetonka, Plymouth. She's now an assistant professor over at Marquette in Milwaukee. And when she took the job there, her research is really on literature, Native American literature. But when she took the job there, they kind of like opened Pandora's box and were like, well, we have all these boarding school and church records. So she's kind of making her way through that just to really see what they even have, because they have so many records of Catholic churches, not only across the United States, but into Canada as well. So there's lots to be thought of. And the religion and kind of what are the responsibilities now. Yeah.
That's a topic that some of the people that are kind of jumping on this bandwagon talking about native schools are, they do it for a reason. I think there's a political reason for it, right? Why it's coming out now. And but I think the more they look into it, they'll maybe find some things they didn't expect. Like some of those schools may have done some good,
right?
And some of the parents might have actually wanted their kids to learn a trade in those schools.
Right. I know, like Brenda Child, who's at the University of Minnesota, wrote about boarding schools in her book, and it wasn't always negative. It wasn't always this horrible situation. Some parents and families elected to send their children, and for a lot of children it was a good experience. Children had a place to live, they were fed, they were clothed. So it really is much more complex than just saying it was all negative for everyone. Coming back to these questions and thinking about language, which is what we were leaving off on with your son learning Dakota. So Haha Wakpadan is the Dakota name for Bassett Creek. what do you think about the role and importance of language and place names, particularly in predominantly white settler spaces?
Yeah, I'm kind of divided about it, since we, still refer to that nice lake down in Minneapolis by the slaveholder's name, Calhoun, right?
Mhm.
I mean, we still talk about that in that way, and so it's but maybe my grandchildren won't remember that name
Mhm.
anymore, and that's just fine with me. Yeah, I think it's very difficult for I guess European Americans to pronounce the native languages, and so Wazieta becomes Wayzata, and which I guess is natural, and that's okay. Bidote becomes Mendota, and so uh I I I tend to avoid conversations about it because I know what I think about it, but what I think about it is complex. It's like the boarding school issue. It's a complex thing. I do like seeing the original names used, because it causes people to think differently about
Right.
the place and about the people that and about what the history of the land is like. At the same time, I don't like when people use it for evil.
Mhm.
When they use it to say that white people are evil, and that they're worthless, and they I don't like that. I like reconciliation. I like people to get along.
Mhm.
Again, I'm kind of a relic that way, but it's not the way people think today. But I hope that someday it might be again.
A young looking relic.
Okay.
I think you make a good point too, though. Just because the name of Bede Makaska has changed doesn't mean that people are all going to adopt it and start calling it the Dakota name, the kind of legal
Yep.
name either. It might take generations to get to that point as well.
I mean, when you hear a native person say it, it's a beautiful name.
Mm-hmm.
But when it turns into Bede Makaska, then I'm not sure I like it so much.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point, right? When it's not done well or correctly and intentionally so. Yeah. So another question is to think about the land acknowledgement statements. So this oral history project grew out of a land acknowledgement statement by Valley Community Presbyterian Church. What do you think about land acknowledgement statements broadly? And then once a land acknowledgement statement has been done, what do you see as necessary and supplemental follow-up work?
So there's a part of me that is brought to tears by something like that, because it just feels like somebody's acknowledging something that's been a part of my life, a part of my family's life for generations and centuries, and finally they're looking at it in a way that is honoring, and in a way that is humble, and in a way that is human, and it kind of brings me tears like that, and I'm grateful for that. On the other hand, I see some people that have just so much guilt. They feel so much guilt about their privilege and their the success of their culture and peoples, and the riches they have, and and I guess that it's on the one hand, if they're doing it in the spirit that brings me to tears, that I think is a good, healthy thing for everybody, for all of us. If it's on the other hand, some kind of way to assuage guilt, number one, they didn't do it. They personally didn't, do the atrocities. That they're not personally responsible, and I hate to have them carry that, personally, when it doesn't belong to them personally. If yes, it does belong to them as part of their heritage, and it's not a great heritage. That's not a great part of their great heritage. Everybody's heritage has shadows and things that they're not proud of their ancestors for, including Native peoples. And so I don't like to see that take away their being proud of their own heritage. And I don't think it should be the primary thing that their ancestors are remembered for. I think their ancestors can be honored in other ways that that still acknowledge the injustice and the evil that was done. And we think our in looking at the past, we should always keep in mind that we're looking at the horizon. We're always looking up at the horizon for what's coming next, and how can we avoid these kinds of injustices in the future. That's where our focus should be. What can we learn? And how can we change the way we act? We can never go back and change what happened already, but we can change the choices we have in the future.
And hearing you say that, it makes me really think about land acknowledgements need to be done for the right reason, because somebody or an organization wants to do it, not because they feel like they're forced into it because of this, because of feelings of guilt or wrongdoing.
Yep.
Yeah. Thinking more specifically about the actual Bassett Creek watershed and the surrounding area today. So we know that this was a Dakota place and the Dakota homelands, but it's also a very suburban and highly developed area today. So if there was an opportunity to give advice for those who help steward and manage the Bassett Creek watershed, are there any particular changes or initiatives that you would like to see?
Wow, that's a big question. I haven't thought about that very much at all, and I'm not sure I have much to offer in that way. There's a Bassett Creek Park where my kids and my brothers have all run cross-country races in that park, and so it's well known to us, and we look at it as a place where we have good memories of running hard races, in that place. And I brought my kids there to play a lot. So maybe something interpretive might be appropriate, to go there to acknowledge the original name of the spot. I don't think that could hurt at all. I think that would be a nice addition to what's there, and it wouldn't. I think it would enhance the beauty of the spot, to have people think about, what did this look like before Highway 100 was built through here, and before the lilac bushes were all planted on Lilac Way. Did they grow here naturally too? that might be an interesting thing to find out.
Yeah, I think the Valley Community Presbyterian Church is located on Lilac Drive.
Yep, exactly right. Yep.
And speaking with Jim Rock and his wife Roxanne for this project, I feel like I've learned so much from them about the environmental aspect and status of the watershed. They're very knowledgeable.
Much more than and I've learned a lot.
Much more than me
too. Yeah, much more than me.
Is there anything else that you would like to share with future generations of folks about your experience as a Native person in a predominantly white suburb, or anything else that we may have missed today during our conversation?
Just that I've in working in my yard, I think a lot about this area when I'm in contact with the soil. And, I like to say that I listen to the trees, I'm being all kind of mystical like that, but, there's some pretty old trees in my backyard, and they provide a lot of shade, and they're also a big nuisance. The cottonwood is horrible in the spring when it releases the cotton, and the seeds are sticky and get all over the deck, and sometimes I just want to cut it down, but it's difficult, and I just when I dig in the ground, I always wonder if I'll find something from native populations, but so far just things from the 1950s. That's all I found, but no, I don't have any profound thoughts about that right now. So
I know, I think that's a good point though, is when you live in an area where there were Native people, you never know what you're going to find.
Yeah.
Whether you're looking for it with intention or just by working out in your yard. Yeah. Well, that concludes our official interview. So I am going to stop the recording, but thank you so much, Ben, for sharing your time with us today.
Thank you for listening. This project may serve as a model for other communities that seek to go beyond land acknowledgement. To learn more about this oral history project, please contact Hennepin History Museum. The project was produced following the standards and principles of the Oral History Association. In addition to this podcast, the interview recordings, transcripts, and narrator files included signed legal released agreements can be found at the Hennepin History Museum. Funding and other support was provided by the St. Anthony's Falls Heritage Board, Hennepin History Museum, Valley Community Presbyterian Church, and the University of Wisconsin. This publication was also made possible in part by the people of Minnesota through a grant funded by an appropriation to the Minnesota Historical Society from the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. Any views, findings, opinions, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this publication are those of the authors and do not necessarily represent those of the state of Minnesota, the Minnesota Historical Society, or the Minnesota Historic Resources Advisory Committee. Anaya chopta pecha wopira unkenichiapi. Thank you for listening.